we had quite a lengthy conversation last night
Yeah.
about this and many other subjects. But I think it's best to start off with what are your intentions for the conversation today?
I want to cover, what's sort of been on everybody's mind regarding the shooting in Texas, the active shooter event that occurred in Uvalde, Texas, and all the young children and the teachers who were killed. And I want to talk about these events that have continued to transpire basically since Columbine in 1999, and the change in law enforcement response or lack of response in certain instances, and how that affects us as armed citizens. What does that mean for us as we see these things continue to transpire? And how do we go about communicating to our communities, our individual communities, our families, our churches, any of the micro communities that we belong to? How do we address these issues in a realistic manner that is not intended to frighten people, but to open people's eyes a little bit to the realities that we face?
I think that's something that's lost right now. We spoke about this yesterday, but I feel like since Columbine, absolutely nothing has been done about this. Nothing. Despite, and not to set aside some of the programs they try to do, but nothing has really changed anything, right? So immediately afterwards, I know you said law enforcement changed the way they operated and did things. And the schools themselves started implementing anti-bullying policies and anti-fighting policies and that sort of thing across the nation. And we've seen that has not changed anything. It has not done anything.
It hasn't.
And the one thing that has not changed since Columbine is that the focus is always on gun control.
Yes.
It is, we need more gun control? No, we don't. We need more gun control? No, we don't. I feel like from the outside looking in, I see this and say, why are we talking about guns? Why are we talking about guns? It's not realistic to believe that even if we did pass some gun law, that a criminal is actually going to follow that law. They're already breaking laws like murder. Right? So it's silly to me to believe that implementing some law is going to save lives. I've had this conversation with some folks here recently about gun control and how they feel like the AR-15 needs to be removed from society and so on and so forth, and we need to make stronger, background checks, so on and so forth, right? And they often compare us to compare our country to other countries like the UK or Australia or some of these other places.
Yes.
And they say, since there's no gun violence, there's no violence. That's not true.
Well, no, it's not true.
And it's not true that there's not gun violence. I mean, the
Right.
UK has very, very strict gun laws there,
Yes.
right? And there was just a shooting that happened, last year there? Killed like 8 or 9 people. So criminals will get their hands on guns.
They will. And
So what's realistic? What is realistic? Do we find a happy medium with gun control like so many people are trying to say? Is it that simple? Or which direction does this cultural shift need to go?
So the big point that these folks who want gun control for honest reasons, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you have politicians who want it for dishonest reasons,
Sure, yeah.
Undoubtedly. And there's certainly a segment of the population who also wants it for dishonest
Sure.
reasons. But the folks who look at this, who just want it to stop,
Mm-hmm.
they want to stop turning on the news and seeing 10 or 12 dead kids in another school.
Of course.
I want that too, all right? And I don't think enough people who are on that side of the coin understand we want this to stop too.
Yeah.
We do. When people bring up, the UK, when they bring up the Nordic countries, when they bring up Australia, and they bring up the fact that, gun violence has precipitously dropped. It's not eliminated. You'll never eliminate it. You are talking about countries that have a tenth or smaller of the population of our country.
Right.
All right. So the population, number one, is drastically smaller. Number two, they never had the gun culture that America has had since its inception. There has always been arms in America. That it's been a part of our culture for the history of our country. And the other part being is that being armed was enshrined in our Constitution, all right? And the constitutional laws, the Bill of Rights, they're not like every other law that gets passed by, the state Senate or, even, Congress, federally speaking. In order to overturn one of our constitutional rights, you need to have a vast majority of the population of Congress. And it's not realistic. It's not going to happen. So when you try to pass legislation of more background checks, stricter background checks, eliminate this kind of gun, whatever, I understand the intent behind it being a positive intent. We just want this to stop. Mm-hmm. Well, if this gun law had existed, this particular individual wouldn't have been able to commit this crime. The shooter in Connecticut. The school massacre there. And the overall look at that is one of wanting a positive outcome. But what people aren't understanding is the full spectrum of the difficulties in getting there. Because it's not only a legal difficulty, I would argue impossibility to overturn the Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights. That is an impossibility. But drafting legislation that respects the Bill of Rights, respects the individual's right to bear arms, and does something meaningful to address gun violence is impossible. But even if, and we said this last night, and I think it bears repeating, even if we magically made it completely illegal to own, manufacture, sell, import firearms into America tomorrow, and we stopped manufacturing ammunition tomorrow, and even if 100% of domestic law enforcement was completely bought into the idea of illegal ownership of guns and confiscating firearms, we have somewhere in the vicinity of 500 million guns in America, 500 million or so that we know exist. And if in that notional confiscation, the roughly 1 million law enforcement officers in America were able to confiscate 200,000 guns a day, you're talking about over 6 years to get close to all of the ones we know about. And that's if we don't import any, illegally. That's if there's none illegally manufactured. There are no holes.
A perfect world.
A perfect world.
Right.
And that's just not realistic.
No.
And the difficult part of getting that across to people is not coming off as throwing up your hands. But to my way of looking at it, the cat's out of the bag in America. If we had adopted some sort of UK level or Australian level gun control measures in, say, the early 1970s, and there were 15 or 20 million guns in the country, you might have something to go off of there. But when you have more guns than Americans, you're not going to get them, and you're not going to stop it. So the idea of stopping it is not realistic. It's just not realistic. So what do we want to talk about? We want to talk about the idea of how do we keep people safe, right? As a society, we can't.
So that was going to be my next question for you is, my experiences in life and my interpretation of actual real violence is much different than most of the people that I have conversations with that are on the opposition, right? And I think that's the biggest piece of the puzzle that they're missing is if they understood violence the way that you and I understand violence, they would understand that there's no law or there's nothing that you can do to really prevent it unless you put that responsibility in your own hands. Now, the other side of the coin is that folks actually believe that law enforcement will be there to save them. Like that is to most of us in the training community and the gun community, we all know that it's not realistic to believe that law enforcement will be there to save you. So could you speak on that a little bit and tell us a little bit about what your response time is and what you think even the most perfect training that you could possibly imagine, do you think that law enforcement actually can fill that role of being Superman?
The average response time nationwide to a priority one call, a call of ongoing physical violence, is priority one call. It doesn't matter if it's a fist fight in a bar or an active shooter. It is identified as priority one call. Ongoing physical violence. The average response time nationwide is around 17 to 20 minutes. I, in my middle age and gained weight, can run in excess of 2 miles in 20 minutes. I can do an awful lot with a handgun in 20 minutes. It is not realistic to say that police are going to stop this from happening.
No, let me pause you real quick. You said I can do an awful lot with a handgun in 2 minutes. Can you also do an awful lot with a knife in 2 minutes?
Yes, of course.
With your bare hands.
Yes.
With a baseball bat.
Of course.
Right. You can do a lot of damage to a lot of innocent people.
With anything. With anything.
20 minutes.
99% of the population of this country is smaller than me.
Right.
I'm well in excess of 6 feet tall and real close to 250 pounds. There's not an awful lot of people who are going to be able to put a stop to me if I decide to put physical violence on other people, and it doesn't matter if it's with my bare hands or I pick something up off the fireplace.
Doesn't matter if you're that size or not. I mean, it could be a 14-year-old,
True.
a 14-year-old, or
True.
15-year-old kid
You take
lost his marbles.
Take somebody the size of my son, and
Yeah.
you put a machete in his hand.
Well, you just let him use his bare hands, and he's fighting kids like my children,
Right.
a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old.
The whole point is that in the most ideal of circumstances, where as soon as violence happens, a 911 call goes directly to a dispatcher, and that dispatcher has excellent communication skills, extracts very solid information from the caller, and immediately dispatches a local police officer to do so, and that local police officer happens to be in the very near vicinity to where that's happening, you are still looking at somewhere around 3.5 to 5 minutes before a police officer is right there ready to make something happen. When you look at these active shooter incidents, for all intents and purposes, 5 minutes is an eternity. You've been in gunfights before. 5 minutes is a really long time when bullets are coming at you. It is forever. And if you expect that, okay, I got to just survive 5 minutes, then the cops will be here. Then they'll save me. You don't know who you're getting as a cop. You're more likely than not getting me. You're getting somebody else. And I'm not here to put any other kind of police officer down, but the fact of the matter is that 90% of the police officers that I've seen in the course of my over 20-year career now are not good shooters. The majority of our students here at Apache will outshoot the majority of police officers I have met in my career. They are not highly proficient, combat effective people who are there to save you. They're not, realistically. And then you throw in other human elements, like happened in Texas, where you have poor communication with command staff. You have cops who are just terrified. They've never had a gun fired at them in anger before, and this is a new experience for them. And the substandard training that is the low bar that has to be met by everybody, it's a low bar. It's there not to make anybody excel. It's there to insulate agencies from liability. That's what it's there for. When those police officers are the ones responding, you're talking about the real human elements of terror.
Right.
They're just as terrified as everybody else in that instance, unless they are people like you or me who've been in active duty infantry situations overseas, or long-term law enforcement officers who've been in real gunfights before. You don't know how you're going to act when you're confronted with that level of violence. Those police officers are just as subject to those emotional reactions as the people who are in these schools or malls or office buildings or whatever else.
Right. Or the cause of, like, the disbelief, right? Are you sure there's really a shooter in there? You know, like, I think that's just fireworks. You know, there's a lot of that causes a delay, and that delay takes more time. That time means more bodies on the ground. Mm-hmm. And so to suggest that to put all of this effort, I should say, to put all of this effort and focus on, you know, the law enforcement didn't immediately go inside. I have my personal opinions on that, and quite honestly, none of it really even matters, right? Let's talk about expectations. If I, as a parent, expect my child to be safe in a public school, safe from gunfire, safe from mass killings in general, I believe in this day and age, it is unfortunately naive.
It's an unreasonable expectation anyway. If you don't want to put the label of naivete on it, it's not a reasonable expectation at this point.
Exactly. So to be surprised that police officers did not save more children is not a reasonable expectation.
No, it's not, unfortunately.
Or save all of the children,
right.
Especially.
It's not a reasonable expectation. We've got a over 20-year history of these events continuing to happen. And typically after a big event like this one in Texas, highly publicized, a large number of people died, you'll have follow-on copycat events where these people who have these emotional and mental difficulties and they see that and they're like, this is my go-to. I'm going to get a couple minutes of fame. You know, I was going to off myself anyway. I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna make these people pay for whatever real or imagined transgressions have befallen this individual. Nobody is more concerned about Tim Kelly's safety than Tim Kelly.
That's what I was getting at.
I love you like a brother. You're more concerned about your safety than I am concerned about your safety. Bottom line. But I'm more concerned about Dan Brady's safety than you are. Right? And you and I have accepted that a long time ago, that nobody's responsible for my safety but me. Right? So we make this conceptual leap, and you know, the big phrase that has been going around the training community of late, last few years is, no one's coming.
Right.
It's up to you. And Unfortunately, with the events in Texas, that was proven correct.
Right.
Nobody's coming, and it has happened in a number of other instances as well. It's up to you. It is up to you to take charge of your personal safety, not only for these big active shooter events, but when you go to get gas at the Sheets down the road, when you go to pick up your kids from school, when you go to a restaurant with your wife. Bad things happen to good people in nice places. There's no real solid predictor of violence. There are certainly greater areas of concern, certain places that you don't go at certain times, but you can't predict random violence. That's why it's random. You don't know when your moment is going to come, and the odds of a police officer standing next to you when that moment comes are real low. So no one's coming. It's up to you, and the full spectrum of that needs to be grasped by everyone, and we need to start having very difficult conversations with the people around us. And you and I already have these conversations with our families and stuff like that, but I think the folks that we want to address here are the people who have had up until this point maybe this notion that, well, the police are going to save us. They're not. What does that mean? As you pointed out just a few minutes ago, it is not a reasonable expectation that the police are going to be there to save your kids. So what does that mean? You have to have some really hard conversations with your kids. Yeah. The natural inclination, I want to say, it might be the wrong way to phrase it, but the inclination that we have as parents to our kids is to shield them from the things that make the world ugly and nitty-gritty as long as we possibly can, and keep them with that innocent child mind, because it's adorable and it is pure. And when you get to see that, it seeps a little bit of humanity back into you, and It makes you feel like things are going to be okay for a little while.
Yeah.
And when that is erased from your kids, a little piece of you dies. It hurts. It hurts to see kids see these things and accept these things as reality. And that's what we want to kind of talk about here, is that introducing our children to the realities that we face. I don't want school shootings to happen any more than anybody else. I want them to happen less than anybody else does. But I don't want the first time that my children are exposed to violence to be right there, right in front of them. The first time that they ever hear gunfire to be inside their school, and them to have that natural reaction of, was that really gunfire? Somebody dropped something. Somebody dropped something loud. No, it's gunfire, and you know it's gunfire. But you're in denial about that because you don't want to deal with reality. If you're not introduced to reality in small doses prior to this, you're going to ostrich and put your head in the sand.
Sure. So the answer then is to just arm all teachers, right? Sorry, that's such a terrible question. But I mean that's the other side of the argument is a lot of people say, well, I mean, if I can't be there to save my kids, then why don't we just arm the teachers?
I am not against anybody being armed. I don't want to disarm anyone, right? But the fact of the matter is that people who are teachers, by and large, are not people who are overly familiar with violence. there are certainly exceptions. I know a couple of former Marine infantry dudes who became high school teachers, right? Those guys are fairly familiar with violence, and if they were people who were otherwise inclined to go about armed and to take training and to be proficient in the armed lifestyle, yeah, I want them armed. Yeah, I want them to have guns there in the school and to be that barrier between my kids and some emotionally disturbed person who has a gun and is intent on slaughtering a bunch of children. However, I can't take my son's English teacher, who's a lovely woman, and be like, this is a Glock 19, and I'm going to teach you how to use this Glock 19 regardless of whether you want to or not, because I need you to protect my children.
Right.
That's absurd.
Yeah.
Teachers are underpaid, overworked, underfunded, and they are doing their...
Sounds like law enforcement.
It's worse for teachers.
Yeah.
It's worse.
Yeah.
They're using their own dollars of their already minimal salary to buy classroom supplies and things of that nature. And the problem I have with this idea of arm all the teachers don't want to be armed.
Right.
And if you're gonna opine that we have the necessary time, money, and interest in teaching, I don't know how many teachers there are in America. I'm gonna guess that there's something in excess of 1 million teachers in America. I could be wrong, but it's just a wild guess. That we're going to teach 1 million individuals how to be responsibly, professionally armed people. I think that's ludicrous. I do think that availing them of the ability to be armed should they want to be. Ohio just did this. Ohio, I think the Congress in Ohio has put forth a bill, and I don't know that it's law yet, but they're looking at making it allowed for teachers to be armed should they want to. I think that's a fine idea. But what I want to get everybody away from is this single step fix idea. Gun control is the answer. Arming the teachers is the answer. Making AR-15s illegal is the answer. Anti-bullying campaigns is the answer. It's not. This is a intricate, nuanced, multi-stage problem that our whole society faces, and there's not going to be an easy fix to it. I don't know that there is an actual fix to it, except accepting the idea that you are responsible for your own safety and no one else is coming. It's up to you. So we have to have, obviously I'm not going to give my 16-year-old a handgun and be like, hey, you're going to CC when you go to school now because I want you to be safe. Because I'd be committing several felonies in doing that. And as good as my son is with a handgun at this point in his life, he's not ready for that kind of responsibility.
Right.
So what does that mean? That means we have to tell our kids about these things, starting with your kids' age, young. You got to start them with the idea that there are bad people out there. Not everybody is like the people that you know, who's loving and affectionate and has your best interest involved, and they care about you as a human being. There's a lot of people out there who aren't like that at all.
Right.
And for no identifiable reason, they will hurt you.
Right. Let's pause.
Okay.
Because I'm pretty sure this thing's run out. All right. So when we left off, we're essentially breaking it down to each individual is responsible for their own individual safety and security,
right,
and not to be relying on somebody else. But there are obstacles that interfere with this.
Yes.
And a lot of them are gun laws,
Mm-hmm.
right, that interfere with somebody's lawful right to carry a tool that might mean that they are that they could use to save themselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we talked earlier about all the legislation and everything that has to be put in place in order for these gun laws to pass.
Yes.
Well, the same thing has to happen in order to remove some of those things too.
Right.
So in order to suggest that teachers can be armed, well, that takes a lot of time to get those bills to pass,
Yes.
if they're even going to pass.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So that doesn't change anything. It doesn't change the criminal's mindset of next week. You know, we just said it a while ago, the copycat thing. Next week, maybe there's going to be another mass killing, and there's nothing I can do until this bill is passed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know, speaking for myself, I think one of the things a lot of people confuse themselves are confused about is what it means to be a law-abiding citizen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I consider myself to be a law-abiding citizen. I've also broken several laws, right? If you tell yourself that you abide by every single law, I'm sorry, it's just not. It's just not it, right? You've been caught speeding, right? Or you had a seatbelt ticket, or you did this or did that, right? Not everybody is perfectly living a law-abiding lifestyle, right? So I learned from a mentor of mine. I won't mention any names. Basically, what I gathered from the class that I took was not to confuse the priority of life over the desire to want to keep from breaking a law. Right? So what that means is just that. I do not want to, I do not wish to break any law. But if it means that if it means the safety of me and my family, there is nothing that you can do to stop me. Absolutely nothing.
So that's a question I have gotten a number of times, and it is commonly referred to non-permissive environments, right? People who are inclined to carry concealed, they do so on a very, very regular basis, and they want to remain law-abiding citizens. So I had the question posed to me by a close friend. What do you do when you go to the post office? I'm like, that is a question that you have to answer for yourself. How long are you going to be in the post office? Where is your post office? How well do you carry concealed? I'm not going to sit there and suggest to you or to anybody else that you'd better disarm when you go in a place that has the no gun sign. I'm not going to sit there and tell you that. I will tell you that there are penalties if you get caught doing so, depending on what the place is and depending on what your jurisdiction says. There are some states that have force of law behind the signs, and if you violate the sign at Walmart, you can get arrested for that. Obviously, levels of site security play a part in there. You're probably not sneaking a Glock 17 past the courthouse. Like you're not getting in there with it. Your kid's school, it's up to you, and that's not a question I can answer for you or for anybody else.
What risks are you really willing to take?
Right.
That's really what it is.
And that's what it boils
risk
down
matrix.
to. And it's, I'm very, very fond of the saying, it's not the odds, it's the stakes. Because the odds of being caught in any one of these active shooter events or some other type of high-end violence, the individual odds at any one point in time are minuscule, but they're not zero. And if you are caught in that terrible moment, that's a question you have to answer for yourself. So it commonly referred to as non-permissive environment carry, where it is either socially frowned upon. Say, you're not your wife, but like your average person's wife's cocktail party with friends who are not gun people, who would be aghast at the idea of you carrying a handgun into this nice establishment where they're having a very nice dinner and everybody's dressed all to the nines and everybody looks pretty and perfect. There's no legal ramification there, but there may be a social ramification there. Yeah. That maybe your wife wouldn't be real happy about if it came out that you were carrying a gun. All the way up to I have tried to sneak a gun into the courthouse. You face some massive legal repercussions there,
sure.
And everything in between.
Right.
I can't answer that question for anybody else but you. But I think having this conversation with people and being like, this is a decision you need to make. Nobody else can make this decision for you.
Yeah.
You need to have a what do we call it in the Marine Corps? The risk matrix thing. Blanking on the term. The risk assessment.
Threat management.
No, when you're talking about liberty risk and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, it's neither here nor there.
Drawn blank too.
Drawn up complete blank. And the next thing that we need to do is talk to our kids, because the one size fits all answer across the country after Columbine was lockdown drills. When I was a kid, we had fire drills. The whole building's made out of concrete, but we still have fire drills. Now we have these lockdown drills, and all the doors get locked from the exterior, and everybody locks the classroom door, and to a variety of different extents. That may prevent some escalation of body count in terms of if you reduce the amount of access to people, all the doors being locked and everything else like that. The other thing it does is hampers people like me from getting there and stopping it. If the answer is cops getting there and putting an end to the violence, I can kick in a residential door rather easily. There's not an awful lot of residence doors I've seen that were not going to go down with either my foot or a ram. They're usually going in. Commercial grade doors, on the other hand, I could kick a commercial grade door on a school until my leg fell off, and it's not going to do anything to it. So how if it's locked down, how am I now getting in this school? And this is something that we've been in the law enforcement community have been talking about for 20 years. How are we getting in? Well, there's a box that has the keys that that we can get a key to that gets the master key out of there, and now you have the master. Well, who has the key to the box that has the master keys in it? The fire department. Well, is the fire department going to come on scene when there's an active shooter? No, they're waiting 600 yards away in a staging area. So how do we breach into this commercial grade door that's exterior opening? Well, I don't carry tow hooks in a cruiser to hook up to the doors and pull it off the building. And even if I can make entry into the exterior, now all these interior doors are closed to me. A lot of the classroom doors now they're solid wood or they're metal. And again, a lot of them are exterior opening. I'm not going to pull that thing off the hinges.
Right.
And if they're interior opening, you're talking about a hardened steel lock into a metal frame that is bolted to a concrete structure. I can pick you up and throw you at it as hard as I want to, and it's just going to hurt you. It's not going to do anything to the door. So if there's an active shooter on the other side of that door, how do I get in there? How do I make that happen? And that's some of the, not all of the, but some of the challenges that the law enforcement officer and law enforcement executives and administrators need to address, because we're not supposed to even wait for SWAT we're supposed to just make it stop. Well, if you have metal doors in the way and I don't have access to keys, how do I make it stop? And these are those questions. But we got to talk to our kids about the fact that you know as well as I do, in a combat environment, if you don't have heavy cover, people who stop moving die.
Yes.
It's the way that works.
Yes.
It's an unfortunate reality of armed conflict. And I have instructed my children, this is a step I took because I've known this forever, my entire adult life, that lockdowns are not intended to stop anything. They're intended to limit a body count. That's all. I don't want my kids to be part of that body count. So I have told my children, I don't care what your principal says, I don't care what your teacher says, I don't care what anybody else instructs their kids to do, I don't care what your school resource officer says. You know what gunfire sounds like, and if you hear gunfire in your school, leave. Run as hard and fast and as far as you can. Get away from it. For a couple of reasons. One, as we just said, self-evident, people who stop moving in combat die. And two, I would rather, and I would personally give this advice to every single school student in the entire country at this point in time. I, as a police officer, would rather spend the next 12 hours of my shift and into overtime trying to find out where you are rather than mop you up. Yeah. And one of the things that a lockdown has been intended to do is to minimize the effort in gaining accountability of who is present alive and who is present dead. It's morbid. It's a morbid thought, but it's true. It's accurate. If kids hear gunfire at school and they all go and they just run as far and fast as they can, it's difficult for school administrators, school teachers, police officers, all the first responders. Where are all these kids? They're not dead.
Yeah.
We'll find out where they are. We know why they left. They're not playing hooky. They're trying to get away from bullets. That is the advice I have given. There's another step, a step you've taken. Don't let your kids go to public school.
Yeah.
You know, homeschooling is an option for some people. And I applaud people who have the ability to do that and the grace within their souls to do it as well, because I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. But that is, again, a question only you as parents can answer. Am I willing to do that? What is the risk? It's another risk assessment matrix.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing. I think that a lot of people lose sight in is, look, it's up to you. I'm not going to judge you either way. If you decide to put your kids in public school, that's up to you. I'm not saying that me or mine are more special because we were homeschool or I homeschool my kids. I wouldn't suggest anything like that. It doesn't fit everyone's lifestyle.
Correct.
The key component here is that you take the time to address this reality. You have those difficult conversations with your kids, your significant others, and you ask the difficult questions. And you make a decision based off of the answers that you get. And you put this all in a risk matrix and you start to ask yourself, what are the stakes? What are the stakes? What am I really willing to risk here? Am I willing to risk, sending my kid to a school that has, limited opportunity in surviving some type of mass killing like this? Or do I really need to consider taking a few hours off of my line of work, or putting it somewhere else in the family, putting the responsibility somewhere else in the family to school my children? there are other options out there. We have to think for ourselves. And I think there's so much social media, so much media in general that often think for people. And so they look at that and they say, well, this will all be fixed soon because they're going to get rid of AR-15s. I mean, even if that did fix the solution, we know that's going to take a very, very long time.
When people say that, just as a quick aside, when people say that, I often answer them. I bought my first AR-15 during the assault weapons ban of 1994 to 2004. This idea that AR-15s didn't exist back when the Bill Clinton assault weapons ban existed is ludicrous. It's simply not true. I bought my first AR-15 the week of my 18th birthday, and I still have it.
And the post-ban AR-15s were still a lethal tool.
Of course.
A gun is a gun is a gun.
Gun's a gun,
right? Murder is murder is murder. It does not matter the tool. I don't want to beat that dead horse, but
the other thing that people miss, and I'm just going to touch on this real quick. The other thing that people miss is when media personalities, politicians, talk about weapons of war and blah 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 blah. What people miss, generally speaking, is that there's an enormous difference between offensive use of weaponry and defensive use of weaponry. This is self-evident to you and I, but as we talked about last night, there's no such thing as common sense.
Right.
This is gained knowledge, and people don't have this knowledge. It doesn't matter what firearm I take into an elementary school, because I'm not meeting armed resistance. They're living targets if that is my intent. I get to initiate the hostilities in a offensive use of weaponry. So it doesn't matter if I have a couple of revolvers in my pocket. It doesn't matter if I have a handgun. It doesn't matter if I have a 22 caliber rifle, 22 long rifle, little varmint rifle. I kill a bunch of kids with that just as easily as anything else. Defensive use of weaponry, you don't get to initiate the hostilities. Right. You are responding to hostilities. That requires a much different application of force and a much higher level of training to respond to it adequately, as you and I are well aware. But if you're using a weapon in an offensive manner, in a criminal manner to kill innocent people, it doesn't matter if it's an AR-15 or a Ruger 1022, because you're shooting targets. You're not responding to violence. You're initiating violence.
I think one of the things that it's appalling to me, but this is another one of those unfortunate realities. The people who make and enforce these laws on banning AR-15s, or even and look at any NFA item, period, pick one. The people that make the decisions on these laws and implement these laws don't actually have any education in the subject matter.
Right.
And neither do they actually consult with people who do before they make the laws. They just make the laws based off of feelings. And that is wrong, is absolutely wrong. And it's something we've been fighting as a gun community, as a training community for a very long time. But there are. I mean, we just watched our own president of the United States on national television suggest that a 9mm will blow a lung out of somebody's body. You and I know that's not even close to true.
It's not physically possible.
Right. And it's not new evidence. This is simple physics. That's it. I don't know if that's even. Is that a thing? Simple physics, but it's physics, right? It's just the way it works, and we've known this for generations. But one man can stand on national television and convince a massive amount of people and influence.
One might say a majority of the population,
and they believe it. And they have no idea. They just see that and they say it's scary. I feel like that is absolutely no different than me walking into surgery, right? Having some level of power. Me walking into someone else's surgery and seeing an incision being made and parts of someone being pulled out of them in order to repair it or whatever. But I look at that and I say, that is scary, that is awful. No, you can't do that anymore. And now nobody can have any knee replacements. Nobody can have any removals of tumors or anything along those lines.
Yeah, because it looks gross and scary.
Because it frightened me, and I just convinced the majority of the population that it's frightening to see someone cut open and stuff removed from them, even though there's a purpose for it. This is really no different. There is a purpose behind firearms.
Of course.
And it's not this weapon of war mindset. I mean, to argue, my biggest point is to argue about gun control one way or the other during this time over this topic, over mass killings, is wasting time. It's wasting energy completely. It goes nowhere. It hasn't got us anywhere since Columbine.
People want a simple fix, and the governmental officials, I refuse to call them leaders, the governmental officials want to convince their constituents that they're doing something about it.
Right.
So that they continue to get voted into office, or if not them, their cronies. Listen, folks, doing something about it is taking responsibility for your own personal safety. If you want to do something about it, take responsibility. Understand that it's up to you. And that's about as basic as I make it, and we've talked for like an hour about this.
Yeah.
And I could probably talk for the rest of my life about it. The only way that this gets better is if enough individuals assume their own responsibility for their safety and completely accept that no one's coming to save you, that there is no Superman, the Marvel comic universe is not a real thing. Iron Man's not going to come and stop the bullets. It's just not going to happen. And you can make all the gun laws that you want. There's 500 million guns in this country, and it's going to continue to happen. That is the sad reality, that the mentally unstable, the emotionally wounded folks of this country who want to make other people hurt like they hurt, they're going to find a way to do so.
Right.
And the only thing that's going to stop them from doing so is if there's enough people like you who just happen to be there when it happens and are willing to visit violence on that individual because they started it, and put them down.
Yeah. And that's not just lip service either. I mean, accepting that major responsibility. It's not just about, yep, I'm going to carry a gun around and I'm good. It involves a serious inside look at yourself, what your expectations are, what your capabilities are, what your limitations are, and you need to see what you can grow in that. If you feel like you don't want to wish to carry a gun, learn to use medical gear. Learn to stop the bleed. Learn something along those lines. Learn something to contribute. Right. That's really what it boils down to. If you feel like you have all of it figured out with the use of a handgun, I would implore you to go seek out training and discover whether or not that's actually true.
Absolute fact.
Not to prove to someone else, but to prove to yourself.
Yes.
There are metrics out there that exist that will hold you to a high standard, and if you're going to carry a gun, you should be seeking those out. And I think that's something that folks should be considering if they're going to take on that responsibility?
If you decide to carry a concealed weapon, you need to accept the mantra that I have. I'm not good enough yet. I'm not good enough yet. I'm pretty good with a handgun. I'm not good enough yet, right? I don't have a diverse enough skill set yet, so I'm going to keep seeking that training. I'm not good enough yet, and make it a journey, not a destination. I'm gonna stop with this. College football coach back in the '60s, Bear Bryant, said, "The will to win doesn't matter. Everybody has the will to win. It's the will to prepare to win that matters."
That's a good thing to close out on. Well, it looks like we're running out of time anyway, so I want to say thank you. Seriously, man, you took, you can tell this is really important to you. You're the one that reached out and said, hey, I want to shoot this Fireside Chats on this subject, and you took it upon yourself to drive 4.5 hours up here and stay the night and spend an entire day out here making sure that this video got shot so you can we can share this knowledge with other people. I really appreciate your devotion to this and showing up.
It's a subject I am passionate enough about that I have been formally disciplined at my place of work for being overly demonstrative.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all we have for you today, folks. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below what you would like to hear us talk about or discuss next time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you out here.